Hello, everyone. My name is John Sierra, and I am a Tolkien scholar, which means that I am constantly learning about and also teaching about the works of J.R.R. Tolkien. I'm generally the person you can come to with any question about his works, whether it's The Hobbit, The Lord of the Rings, The Silmarillion, or any of the other stories. And we've been doing this for quite a while, and the channel is becoming successful, and I thank you guys for that. This past week, I did not get to write as much. I did not get to answer as many questions as I'd like to, so we have less to go over this time. We have 14 questions. It's no big deal. I still have plenty of material to do a video. It was just this last week has been kind of very, very busy. I did want to show you guys something very cool that I got from my friend Matt Richardson, who is one of the co-hosts of my podcast, The Council of Tolkien, which the third episode will be showing itself here to members very soon, and then to the rest of you shortly after that. But I got this this kit for making wax seals. I have a wax stick here, and I have a pestle with a very strong, this is what you stamp it with a very strong magnet on it. And then I have the coin, and each of us in our writers group, the 9, picked a different realm. Now, unfortunately, the realm that I picked was not available. I picked Lindon, which is where the Grey Havens are, where the elves, and eventually Frodo and Sam and whatnot, they all sailed to the west. And I've always been fascinated with the Grey Havens. My space on Quora is called the Grey Havens, for example, but it wasn't available, so my second choice was the Shire, which is Lindon adjacent, and I don't know how well the camera will pick it up, but you can see it's a willow tree. You know what, I'll just I'll find the picture online, and I'll put a picture up right there so that you guys can see it clearly. And so these come from a company called Shire Post. You can see their seal on this lovely sack that they sent everything in. And Shire Post is really cool. Shire Post, they actually invited all of us in the 9 to go to their Shire Festival. I don't think I'm going to be able to make it this year because it is in Arkansas and it's sort of short notice, but a bunch of my fellows in Tolkien scholarship are definitely going to be there. I know Matt is going to be there. Sid's planning to be there. Laurel is most likely going to be there. Perhaps next time I'll be able to go there. It's a lot of travel. I'm pretty far away from Arkansas. But anyway, I did want to mention that, and they're also sending me one of the coins that they're not allowed to sell, the Melkor's coin. It's a crown. I'm going to put a picture here. Melkor's crown is shown with the Silmarils, and then on the reverse side, you can see it has on Calagon. I'm going to try and find a picture of that and put it there. If there's no picture of it, I'll have to wait till I get it, and I'll take a picture of it. These coins were made, and they're really, really, really rare because the company has the exclusive license to make coinage based on The Lord of the Rings, and also, I believe, A Song of Ice and Fire as well. But the Tolkien Enterprises told them that they could not sell the Melkor coin because it was not from The Lord of the Rings, it was from the Silmarillion, and there's ways of getting around that, but when you have an exclusive license like that, you tend to do what the company says, even if it's legal for you not to do it. They're going to withdraw from the contract, and they're not going to re-up you. But there's nothing that says they can't give them away, and I'm very excited to get this coin because it is an extremely rare thing to have. I will definitely be showing it to you on here. To give you guys a quick update on the channel before we get to our reading, let's see, how many subscribers are we up to? So the goal right now is indeed, as I stated, 10,000. Of course, we just hit 1,000 not too long ago, but I wanted to give us a far-off goal to aspire to. Subscriptions have not really slowed down. We're at, as of recording this, 1,177, which is great. So anyway, we're going to get into a reading, and I've decided to read a bit of on fairy stories. So if you haven't subscribed, if you're watching this and you haven't subscribed, do me a favor, hit the subscription, hit the bell, turn on notifications and all that. I won't flood you. I don't do more than 2 or 3 videos a week, sometimes only 1. We always do the question and answer video every week. So on fairy stories, which you can get in the Tolkien Reader here, is Tolkien speaking about the importance of fairy stories. And I want to read specifically the bit about children, because I've always found that he has I'm not going to read the entire bit on children, but a bit of it. He has a unique perspective towards children. He wrote stories that were suitable for children, such as Roverandrum and The Hobbit and Farmer Giles of Ham, and even to an extent, The Lord of the Rings could be viewed as a sort of a young adult fiction. It's a bit more advanced and a bit more violent than The Hobbit, for example, but even that you could say is suitable for children. He didn't talk down to children. He didn't patronize them in any sort of way. He respected children. So I'm going to read you a bit of his comments on children and relation to fairy stories. I will now turn to children, and so come to the last and most important of the three questions. What, if any, are the values and functions of fairy stories now? It is usually assumed that children are the natural or the specially appropriate audience for fairy stories. In describing a fairy story, which they think adults might possibly read for their own entertainment, reviewers frequently indulge in such waggeries as, "This book is for children from ages of 6 to 60. But I have never yet seen the puff of a new motor model that began thus, 'This toy will amuse infants from 17 to 70. Though that, to my mind, would be much more appropriate. Is there any essential connection between children and fairy stories? Is there any call for comment if an adult reads them for himself? Reads them as tales, that is, not studies them as curios. Adults are allowed to collect and study anything, even old theater programs or paper bags. Among those who still have enough wisdom not to think fairy stories pernicious, the common opinion seems to be that there is a natural connection between the minds of children and fairy stories, of the same order as the connection between children's bodies and milk. I think this is an error, at best an error of false sentiment, and one that is therefore most often made by those who, for whatever private reason, such as childlessness, tend to think of children as a special kind of creature, almost a different race, rather than as normal, if immature, members of a particular family, and the human family at large. Actually, the association of children and fairy stories is an accident of our domestic history. Fairy stories have, in the modern lettered world, been relegated to the nursery, as shabby or old-fashioned furniture is relegated to the playroom, primarily because the adults do not want it and do not mind if it is misused. It is not the choice of the children which decides this. Children as a class, except in a common lack of experience, they are not one, neither like fairy stories more, nor understand them better than adults do, and no more than they like many other things. They are young and growing, and normally have keen appetites. So the fairy stories, as a rule, go down well enough. But, in fact, only some children and some adults have any special taste for them, and when they have it, it is not exclusive, nor even necessarily dominant. It is a taste, too, that would not appear, I think, very early in childhood without artificial stimulus. It is certainly one that does not decrease, but increases with age, if it is innate. It is true that in recent times fairy stories have usually been written or adapted for children, but so may music be, or verse, or novels, or history, or scientific manuals. It is a dangerous process, even when it is necessary. It is indeed only saved from disaster by the fact that the arts and sciences are not, as a whole, relegated to the nursery. The nursery and schoolroom are merely given such taste and glimpses of the adult thing as seem fit for them in adult opinion, often much mistaken. Any one of those things would, if left altogether in the nursery, become gravely impaired. So would a beautiful table, a good picture, or a useful machine such as a microscope, be defaced or broken if it were left long unregarded in a schoolroom. Fairy stories banished in this way, cut off from a full adult art, would in the end be ruined. Indeed, insofar as they have been so banished, they have been ruined. The value of fairy stories is thus not, in my opinion, to be found by considering children in particular. Collections of fairy stories are, in fact, by nature, attics and lumber rooms, only by temporary and local custom playrooms. Their contents are disordered and often battered, a jumble of different dates, purposes, and tastes. But among them may occasionally be found a thing of permanent virtue, an old work of art, not too much damaged that only stupidity would ever have stuffed away. So you can see that Tolkien is rail against the idea that fairy stories are specifically for children. They're suitable for children just as they're suitable for anybody else. But in putting them in this sort of way, in adapting them for children and making them very, very childlike and child-friendly, we have ruined them. And this is why he hated Disney. Tolkien and C.S. Lewis would go to Disney films and hate watch them. They would do like a Mystery Science Theater 3000 and sit there and make fun of the films and how they ruined the great stories that they knew from their youth and their adulthoods. And he brings up an interesting point, is that there need be no comment on adult reading. For example, The Hobbit. The Hobbit is very much a fairy story. And I had gotten a question, and I think I did feature it in a video not very long ago, from an 18-year-old who, I mean, I would consider, at the age of 43, I would consider an 18-year-old to be kind of still a child, not in the legal sense, of course, but I don't think that that your brain is fully developed at 18. I know mine certainly was not developed at 18, and I think that, when you're 18, you certainly feel like an adult. You look like an adult, but you are, in fact, not an adult, I don't think. And that there's nothing wrong with that. It's not wrong to be a child or to be a juvenile. It's not demeaning. You're not a special class. You're just not fully matured yet. You're not just fully grown yet. And this is something that I've held and that Tolkien has held as well. I think he's very correct in this. But anyway, this 18-year-old, we'll say young man. I don't want to offend somebody who's 18 by calling them a child, even though it shouldn't be an offensive term. Asked me if they were too old to read The Hobbit, and I said, there were a lot of people out there that would be very willing to smother your inner child. Don't be the one to do that for them. You're never too old to enjoy these stories. The Hobbit offers a lot to adults, and that's why I've been doing readings of it and such. But anyway, we're going to get to your questions. Let's get to the first one right now. Our first question came in by the request of Jeff Bradley, who asked, how did Frodo escape the Barrow with the One? The other hobbits were out cold and dressed in what was seemingly ritualistic garb, yet Frodo woke up with all of his possessions intact. How or why did the Wight miss this? So, putting this scene into its full context is very important. Frodo and the others were not caught all at once. In the previous scene, Frodo turns to speak with them, but they have already been captured. Frodo, too, is eventually captured. He was the last one to be brought into the Barrow. As such, we can deduce that the other three were prepared first, and Frodo came too before he could be garbed in such a way. Thankfully, he remembered to call forth Tom Bombadil. Now, there was a comment that came in here from the original questioner, from Jeff Bradley, who said, last captured, first to wake up. It must be that indomitable spirit Gandalf later refers to in Rivendell while Frodo is sleeping. Perhaps looking at the situation in a hypothetical would better. Let's suppose the Wight kills all four hobbits and is now either in direct possession of the One, or at least it is in the Barrow. How would the Wight communicate this, or the Witch King find out? There is telepathic communication, so this might be a possibility. Probing for more on the nature of the Wight, what spirit can animate a body other than a Maiar or the victim of a Morgul blade or weapon? There are none as far as I know. You must admit, failing to capture it seems like a major fail. Mindless spirits don't perform ritualistic sacrifice, though perhaps automatons do. So I think you actually answered that last question yourself when you said the victim of a Morgul blade. You have to understand where the Barrow was and what the Barrow was. It was a burial ground for victims of the Angmar War, and many of the victims of the Angmar War did fall victim to the Morgul blades and became what Tolkien referred to as lesser wraiths. And Barrow Wights, we never really get a concise or conclusive explanation of their nature from Tolkien, but to me it seems most likely that they are indeed these lesser wraiths. So certainly they were created in that war. I mean, there were anti-Nazgûl weapons there, the Barrow blades. There are many ways in which a mortal soul could be anchored to the world. It does not necessarily require a Morgul blade. It does not necessarily require the intervention of a Maiar spirit either. It could be an oath, like the Oathbreakers, the dead men of Dunharrow that lived in the mountains and finally passed from the world after fulfilling their oath that they originally had made to Isildur, to Aragorn. So there are other ways. There is necromancy in the world of Tolkien. The Barrow Wight is interesting because we don't know a lot about it. We don't know that he would have been in communication with the Witch King. Had the Witch King come by, he certainly would have been the master of the Barrow Wight, and therefore the Barrow Wight's true master would be Sauron, and this would eventually lead to Sauron recovering the ring. So it's a good thing that didn't happen. The Indomitable Spirit is a good interpretation of why Frodo was the last captured, but also the first to wake up. But I've always read the scene as that the Barrow Wight had Sam and Merry and Pippin under a spell of some sort, and that's why they were unconscious still, and Frodo had managed to wake up just in time. It's still, your interpretation fits in there as well, as to why he woke up before the Barrow Wight could put him under any sort of enchantment. Anyway, next question. Was the people of Lake Town, I think you mean were the people of Lake Town close to the Woodland Elves, or was it just trade and there were no daily interactions? So I would say that they were indeed close, that they were friends. They weren't just trading. Obviously, they had good trade, but it did not take much for them to form a very close alliance in the events of The Hobbit. The elves heard rumor of Smaug's demise, and they were heading to Erebor to check that out and claim some of the treasure for themselves when they saw the state of Esgaroth. Thranduil could not allow his friends, the Lake Men, to suffer in such a way, and thus he stopped to help them. Furthermore, Bard, who was now acting as a spokesperson for Esgaroth, was offered a deal by Thorin II Oakenshield that the Dwarf King would be willing to negotiate with him if he ditched Thranduil and the elves, and Bard refused. They stood united against the dwarves, and eventually with the dwarves against the goblins and the wargs. I would say that their alliance and their friendship was more than just trade. Okay, next question. Did Bree have any leader or authority figure? It seems to be the only settlement in Middle-earth without a named lord, master, mayor, etc. Very astute of you to notice this. During the majority of the Lord of the Rings, Bree had no such leadership. Bree was a mixed community of men and hobbits in a land known as Breeland, and during the events of the Lord of the Rings, they have no form of government whatsoever. Tolkien mentioned this in a note to a movie producer who was working on an animated version of The Lord of the Rings, which did not see the light of day. There was eventually an animated The Lord of the Rings, but that was not by the same people. He was amused by a scene in which Frodo and company in the storyboards were asked to sign a register at the Prancing Pony. Tolkien's retort was that Bree had no form of government whatsoever, and the idea of keeping records for a simple tavern would be quite foreign to them. As it is part of the lost kingdom of Arnor, they had kings in this land in the past, the king of Arnor and then later the king of Arthedain, which is the section of Arnor that Bree was in. Aragorn, of course, became the king of Arnor at the end of the story, but Gandalf assured Barlam and Butterbur, the innkeeper in Bree, that he would leave Bree alone as they wished to be left alone. There were more than a few people in the comments of this on Quora who pointed out that, if anything, while not in an official capacity, that Barlam and Butterbur was sort of the leader in Bree because he was the innkeeper. He held an important position, he had connections to everyone in town, and he was respected. So I sort of agree with that. You know, we brought this up in the most recent Council of Tolkien as well. There were a lot of people who came to the same conclusion, and I have to say that I agree with that assessment fully. Anyway, next question. Okay, so here's a question that came in from Brian Perkins, who asks, when elves are reincarnated and sent back to Middle-earth, such as Glorfindel, who are killed and buried, do they ever visit their own graves? I've heard this one before, but here's the thing about it. The only elf out of all of the elves that were slain and in Middle-earth and returned that actually came back to Middle-earth, did not just stay in Aman, was Glorfindel. And he would not have been able to visit his own grave. Tolkien was not specific of the exact burial place of Glorfindel, just that his body was rescued by Thorondor, and a cairn was put over his gravesite, and that yellow flowers bloomed there, and it remained so until the world changed. The world changing could have many meanings, but Tolkien was likely referring to the War of Wrath that ended the First Age and destroyed Beleriand. It is unlikely that the gravesite was very far from Cirith Ûrnaith, and certainly Glorfindel would not have been brought all the way to Eriador to be buried. Glorfindel returned to Middle-earth in the Second Age, and his gravesite, along with the rest of Beleriand, was long gone, so there was no way that he could visit his own grave. And we don't know of any other elves that came over that were slain in Middle-earth. They all stayed in Mandos for a time, and then they would live in places like Valinor or Eldamar or Eressëa. So they never came to Middle-earth except for Glorfindel, who was sent specifically by Manwë on a mission along with the Blue Wizards. Okay, next question. Here's an excellent question that comes in from Alex, too. When does the First Age of Middle-earth begin? I've always thought it started with the creation of the sun and the moon. So it's a good question because it's actually a very confusing issue. But the First Age goes back a lot further than that. This is due to the calendar system and how the count of time changed. It's all very confusing, but I'll try to break it down as best as I can. The issue with the ages in Tolkien's work is that different cultures have disagreements over when an age stops and when an age starts, and the way that years were counted changed during the First Age. First, let's talk about the calendar. There are several notes that you'll see next to numbers that indicate the years going back from recent to furthest back. They look like this. If you see FOA, that's Fourth Age, TA, that's Third Age, SA, Second Age, FA is First Age, YT is Years of the Trees, and VY is Valiant Years. Now, due to the distinction in the calendar between the First Age calendar and the Years of the Trees, you would think that the Years of the Trees were a separate age, and that the First Age began with the first year of the First Age, but actually there was overlap. So Valiant Years, let's go into that first. They were actually also called the Years of the Lamps, or the Days Before Days. The concept of an age is nebulous, and it's not beholden to any specific amount of years. For example, Melkor was captured for 3 ages, but all of this occurred during what we understand to be the First Age. The beginnings and the ends of each age are defined as such. The Valiant Years begin when the Ainur first entered into Arda, when the angels came to the world, and it ended when they left Middle-earth and they went to the Undying Lands, and Yavanna created the 2 trees. Years were not counted in Elvish lore previous to the trees, which the elves considered to be the start of the count of time. But the waxing and the waning of the trees and the count of years was based off of these Valiant Years, which are equal to 9.582 solar years. I don't know why Tolkien was so specific. It could have been 9.5 years, but 9.582. The Years of the Trees began with the creation, of course, of the 2 trees, and they end with the destruction and the rising of the sun. The First Age of Middle-earth, though, began with the awakening of the elves in Cuiviénen. This happened in 1050 of the Years of the Trees, and it ended in 500 of the First Age after the fall of Morgoth. This means that the First Age overlaps a great deal with the Years of the Trees. The Second Age started with the fall of Morgoth and ends with the fall of Sauron, and the Third Age starts with the fall of Sauron and ends, well, it's a little bit debated. Some would say that it ends with the second fall of Sauron, and others state it was Elrond passing into the west. This led to different calendars in different parts of Middle-earth, such as Gondor Reckoning and Shire Reckoning. So while the First Age calendar starts with the rising of the trees, the First Age of Middle-earth begins with the awakening of the elves. I know it's confusing, but calendar systems in real life can be very confusing with the different calendar. We have a Julian calendar and a Chinese calendar and a Hebrew calendar and such. So it's somewhat realistic that it would be that ridiculous. Okay, next question. Did the Nazgûl who got a torch thrown in his face by Aragorn die? Well, eventually. But even though fire is very fearsome to the Nazgûl, it takes more than that to kill them. The Nazgûl are products of necromancy. They are permanently anchored to the Nine, which are held by Sauron, and the Nine are permanently anchored to the One, which, though Sauron does not currently hold it during the Lord of the Rings, it is still his ring and his ring only. No one but Isildur had ever tried to dominate the One and master its power, and Isildur failed at mastering it. So, as long as the One endured, they were very, very hard to kill. The torch was not pleasant for them. Neither was the flood that washed them away and killed all but one of their horses. The only Nazgûl to be killed before the destruction of the One was the Witch King, who was killed by Éowyn after Merry's strike with a weapon specifically made to harm Nazgûl made him vulnerable. The rest of them winked out and died as if caught in a flame when the One was destroyed. The magic of the Nine was destroyed with the One, and their mortal souls were freed. Okay, next question. This I find an interesting question. I always start these by saying that you can ask me questions about The Hobbit, or The Lord of the Rings, or The Silmarillion, or any of his other works, or about Tolkien himself. And here's a question about Tolkien himself. Was it challenging for Tolkien to create the Elvish languages and scripts, considering he had no prior knowledge of similar works before writing The Lord of the Rings? Creating languages is always going to be challenging, but Tolkien was not exactly new at it. Tolkien was a linguist and a philologist by trade. His first job after leaving military service was working for the Oxford English Dictionary on researching and writing etymologies. Previous to this, he had a habit of constructing languages of his own, going back to his youth. Tolkien, though through his experience with linguistics, his education, and his work on the dictionary, he understood better than anyone could the challenges of creating languages that work properly. And the biggest bit of this was understanding that for a language to feel real, it has to be connected to a culture that developed it. This is why he wrote his stories. As a fictional language needed a fictional culture to develop it. He did not create the languages for the stories. He created the stories for the languages. It was, of course, still extremely challenging, as he never finished his Legendarium, even with the outline of it, the Silmarillion being cobbled together from various drafts by his son after his death. Okay, next question. What was Saruman's reasoning behind creating the Uruk-Hai instead of using normal orcs? Saruman knew when he was attacking Rohan that he would force the main forces towards Helm's Deep, and there would be a siege. And sieges are traditionally long, sometimes weeks or months or even years in real life, and in Tolkien's world they could last for years, the Siege of Barad-dûr, or even decades, such as the Siege of Unturnno. In any case, Saruman knew that there would be a siege and that it would be a while, so he needed a type of goblin that, while not as intelligent or as great of a fighter as a typical Mordor Uruks, had one advantage, the ability to move and fight in direct sunlight. Sauron, of course, had a way around this. He just cast darkness over Gondor when he put Minas Tirith to siege. But as for Saruman's part, he either did not think of this or he simply lacked this ability. Furthermore, Saruman was not a great war leader. He probably thought larger orcs who could fight in the daytime was an instant win. and their seeming lack of intelligence may have been attractive to him, as they were wholly loyal to him. Okay, next question. If hobbits are men of small stature, then why don't we hear of any crossbreeding? Surely it must have happened somewhere like Bree. And we were just talking about Bree not too long ago and how it's a mixed community. It almost certainly happened, but there's a lot that happens that you just don't hear about. One thing that you must understand about Tolkien's work is that it was not just stories, but rather the lore and history of a fictional world. Just like in any world, there's a lot of things that happen that don't make it into the history books. For example, Aragorn and Arwen were said to be the third union of the Eldar and the Edain in Middle-earth, after Beren and Luthien and Tuor and Idril. However, there was also Imrazur and Mithralis, which was even known to the people of Gondor as a legend of Dol Amroth, and the reason that Prince Imrahil looked elvish. Even Legolas recognizes Imrahil as having elvish ancestry. One could make the argument that Mithralis does not count as Eldar, but then neither would Arwen. She was Perithal. It is just a matter of what is written down and what is not written down. There were likely a great many marriages of Avari elves and men throughout the years, but they weren't important or well-known enough to make it into any of the stories. Similarly, hobbits have a murky origin, with the biggest hint towards it being the thought that an ancient ancestor of the Took clan married a fairy. Now, Bilbo denounces the story as rubbish, but all legends have a grain of truth to them. As an offshoot of men, hobbits must spring from men and would be compatible. I don't think it happened often. They were shy of the big people, and other than Bree-land, they didn't really mix with them. And in many parts of Middle-earth, they were considered to be mythical. Bree, however, does raise the opportunity for hobbit and man pairings. It's just that any such couplings didn't make any particular impact on the history of the land, so they didn't make it into the stories. Okay, next question. Okay, here's a question that came in from Matthew Culbertson, who asked, how would Saruman react if he obtained the One Ring and had Gollum following him around Isengard? I don't think for even a moment that Saruman, if he obtained the One, would put up with Gollum for more than a moment. Gollum was openly defiant to Sauron. He would not bow and scrape to Saruman, even if he did have the One Ring. Gollum was nice to Frodo for a while, partly because his attempt at attacking him had been thwarted, and Frodo let him live, and partly because he thought that he could get his precious back. Saruman did not have the mercy with a capital M, of Frodo, and would not put up with this nasty, stinking creature, nor would he trust him as a servant if that was offered. Frodo decided to trust Gollum because he had no choice. But Saruman was not trying to get to Mordor. He did not need Gollum for anything. If Gollum was following Saruman around, he would find himself dead very quickly. Okay, next question. Here's a question that came in from somebody with just the username MMM. Perhaps it's 3000. When Sam says, I can't carry it for you, but I can carry you in The Lord of the Rings, is this Tolkien referencing his faith? No, not at all. Let's take a look at the line in full context. I'm going to start with an earlier passage from The Return of the King. Look here, Sam, dear lad, said Frodo. I am tired, weary, I haven't a hope left, but I have to go on trying to get to the mountain, as long as I can move. The ring is enough. This extra weight is killing me. It must go. But don't think I'm ungrateful. I hate to think of the foul work you must have had among the bodies to find it for me. Don't talk about it, Mr. Frodo. Bless you. I'd carry you on my back if I could. Let it go, then. Frodo laid aside his cloak and took off the orc mail and flung it away. He shivered a little. What I really need is something warm, he said. It's gone cold, or else I've caught a chill. You can have my cloak, Mr. Frodo, said Sam. He unslung his pack and took out the elven cloak. How's this, Mr. Frodo, he said. You wrap that orc rag close around you and put the belt outside it. Then this can go over it all. It don't quite look orc fashion, but it'll keep you warmer, and I dare say it'll keep you from harm better than any other gear. It was made by the lady. So what we see here is Sam, his full devotion to Frodo. He wants him protected, but Frodo cannot bear the weight of the orcish mail that they were wearing, and he casts it off. The ring is heavy enough for him. Sam expresses a desire to carry Frodo here, but instead he gives him his cloak and it keeps him warm. Then later we get this moment. "Now for it. Now for the last gasp," said Sam as he struggled to his feet. He bent over Frodo, rousing him gently. Frodo groaned, but with great effort of will he staggered up, and then he fell upon his knees again. He raised his eyes with difficulty to the dark slopes of Mount Doom towering above him, and then pitifully he began to crawl forward on his hands. Sam looked at him and wept at his heart, but no tears came to his dry and stinging eyes. "I said I'd carry him if it broke my back," he muttered, "and I will. Come, Mr. Frodo," he cried. "I can't carry it for you, but I can carry you, and it as well. So up you get. Come on, Mr. Frodo, dear. Sam will give you a ride. Just tell him where to go, and he'll go." So these two passages are about 40 pages apart. Note that in the first bit he says that he would carry Frodo if he could, but they still have a long trip in front of them, and this would just break Sam. He can't carry Frodo all the way across the plateau of Gorgoroth. But at this point, in the second passage I read, they've reached what Sam calls the last gasp, and Frodo is at the end of his stamina. Sam carries him until his own stamina gives out, and then Frodo crawls. This is about determination. This is about them wanting to finish their task, and Sam's determination to bring Frodo through it to the end. You know, you could easily say that the virtues of Frodo and Sam represent those of Tolkien's faith. They also represent many faiths. Loyalty and determination and courage are universally lauded traits. Tolkien did not set out to write a Christian allegory, but he noticed in the early stage that The Lord of the Rings was a Catholic work. Despite his intentions not to write it that way, he decided to lean into it, though he kept it subtle. The only direct parallel was Lembas to Eucharist. Now, if you notice, there is scant mention of religions in the main text, with Faramir's prayer to Ilúvatar being the only one, but no churches or cults are featured in The Lord of the Rings, and this is very purposeful. Tolkien was writing something that he considered to be compatible with his faith, but he disliked allegory, and he disliked apologetics and preaching, so he kept these things rather subtle in the narrative. Okay, next question. So here's another one from Matthew Culbertson, who asks, if Saruman had the One Ring, would it have driven him mad like it did with Gollum and caused Saruman to call it as precious and talk to himself like Gollum did? Well, Saruman's lust for the ring had already driven him mad before he came anywhere near it. Not that he ever came anywhere near it, but if we're being honest, he was already quite mad. Saruman did terrible things just to try to convince Sauron to trust him so that he could betray him at a later date. He had already left the path of wisdom and sanity, and he'd gone quite mad. If he obtained the ring, well, it would be a short and a quick fall for him. After the War of the Ring, Aragorn discovered a secret room in Orthanc that had several items of great importance, including the effects of Isildur. Aragorn came to realize that Saruman had discovered the remains of Isildur and kept his effects and burned his bones in the furnaces of Orthanc. In this same room, there was a spot of honor that Aragorn reasoned was for the One Ring, but Saruman was ridiculous if he thought that he was going to have the ring and then leave it in a room like that. He would be slobbering over it, keeping it close with him. He wouldn't exactly be like Gollum, but he would definitely lose his mind. Okay, next question. Here's the one from the thumbnail. I don't like to put the thumbnail question at the very end. It just happened to be this way this time. And this is another one from... Oh, it's a different Matthew. This one's from Matthew Gross, who asks, why were the elves leaving Middle-earth? Because of a terrible thing that happened a very long time ago. The elves originally awoke in Middle-earth, in a place called Cuiviénen, and they were meant to stay there. Not specifically in Cuiviénen, but in Middle-earth. But Melkor attacked them and captured them and tortured them. He had declared himself the Lord of Middle-earth. The Valar fought a war against Melkor for the sake of the elves, and absconded to the Undying Lands with as many elves as were willing to go and able to go, though many stayed behind, and some that went to the Undying Lands returned as exiles. At the end of The Lord of the Rings, it had been thousands of years since Melkor, who is now called Morgoth, had done these things, and the exiles had been forgiven. Galadriel was welcomed home, for example, though they were not forced to travel to the Undying Lands due to the way that Middle-earth was tainted. Anyone who lived in it for too long would feel the effects of his evil. This was not an issue for mortals. They passed from the world, but elves would change after so long in Middle-earth. Their spirits would overcome their bodies, which is a process called fading. The Undying Lands were safer, and they were free from Melkor's taint, so many returned home or sailed to the west after receiving the sea longing, also known as the Unquiet of Ulmo, where they would see the sea, or they would hear the crying of gulls, and they would have this urge, this powerful nostalgia, even if they had never been to the Undying Lands, to sail to the west. You see it happen to Legolas in The Lord of the Rings. Still others did stay. Whatever elves were left after Círdan and Celeborn sailed to the west on the final ship, they would either fade after a time and be drawn to Mandos in the Undying Lands, or if they could resist that summons, they would exist as spirits in Middle-earth. Okay, and now on to the final question. Here's one that came in from Shawnee, I think it is, Shawnee. In Tolkien's Legendarium, is there any record of the other Valar reacting to not one, but two of Aulë's Maiar going rogue? This is an interesting question. A lot of people bring this up from time to time, you know, that two of the great villains of The Lord of the Rings were students of Aulë. Did the Valar have an issue with that? Did they take him to task for it? So I would say the Valar were pretty kind to never put any sort of blame on Aulë for the actions of Sauron and Saruman. And not to mention Feanor, he was not a Maiar, but he was a student of Aulë, and he had also gone rogue in a rather spectacular way. If anyone blamed Aulë for the way that some of his students turned out, it would be himself. Tolkien never wrote about his feelings on the matter, but there's a bit of a hint in the way that he helped out another rogue Maiar. Osse was a Maiar who was a student of Ulmo, who also went rogue. He had a love of destruction and storms, and Melkor, or Morgoth, allowed him to cut loose, so he joined Melkor. It was actually Aulë who came to the conclusion that what Osse needed was to be loved, and he had the idea to send Uinen after Osse to bring him back into the fold. And it's important to note that Osse was not Aulë's student, he was Ulmo's student. So Osse sought forgiveness, and it was given to him. The Valar are forgiving almost to a fault, and this speaks volumes to why they would never make any sort of comment to Aulë or try to make him feel bad for the actions of Sauron or Feanor or Saruman. Okay, so that was the last question for this week. I'll try to have a more robust selection next time. Not that this was a bad selection, it's just that I didn't get to write as much in the past week, so I didn't get to answer so many questions. I was very, very tired, run down, and busy. Anyway, if you've made it all the way through this video and you haven't already, if you're not subscribed, well, why not? Why not? Make Sam Gamgee happy and hit the subscribe button, click the bell and all that stuff, and consider membership. If the join button doesn't work, if you're trying to join the channel, there is a link in the description that will bring you directly to that. A few people have reported that they tried to buy memberships and it didn't work, but I noticed more memberships started flowing in when I put a link to membership in the description, so check that out if you're willing to join. It doesn't cost all that much, and you get to see all of the videos early. A few people asked, this came up multiple times, about why videos that are members only cannot be played on your phone with the screen off through YouTube Premium, and apparently it's just not a feature. YouTube doesn't really make much reference to this. Somebody even asked me, is this something that I could enable in the settings, and no, there is no setting for this. I've scoured the internet and help articles and whatnot looking for the answer, and apparently the answer is that it is working as intended, and the only way to fix that sort of thing, because I think that if you join any channel as a member, you should be able to play the videos in screen lock mode. You know, and even if you have YouTube Premium, you should be able to, if you're a member, you know. So contact YouTube and make a stink about it, because that's the only way that it's going to change. I unfortunately can't change it, but I think that the membership is worth it. I did make it a rather reasonable price, and you get to see each video at least a week early. So we'll see you guys next time.